Yes, it will. That's a good boy. That's a good one. Good job. Up, up. Hello. Good boy. Good boy, Franklin. Good boy.
When we purchased our 14-acre property, the north and south sides had fencing from adjoining properties for their cattle. The east side was completely open and butted up to a natural prairie, and the west side had partial fencing from our neighbor's property line. Fast forward a few months after purchasing the property, and we jumped on a chance to add a dairy cow to our farmstead when we saw Pauline for sale at a nearby micro dairy, only about an hour's drive away. Needless to say, we were not really prepared for Pauline's arrival as we didn't have an adequately fenced in area. That first night we brought Pauline home, we spent the evening with a magnet sweeper picking up buckets full of nails, screws, drill bits, saw blades, and all manner of metal objects out of the barn and the immediate small paddock outside of the barn. We didn't want any of those getting stuck in her hoof if we could help it. Over the next several months, we used some electric temporary fencing that we had purchased from Premier One online. We walked Pauline and then later Franklin to and from the barn every morning and evening to take them to their grazing area and then back down to the barn for the evening. Although this helped with the initial training for Franklin and also helped us get more acquainted with Pauline, it came with several challenges. There is not sufficient natural water source anywhere in the grazing fields, and so we had to haul water to the grazing area. This meant that we filled up a water barrel that was meant for collecting rainwater and then used a Jackery battery with a pump to push the water from the rain barrel out the back of our pickup truck and into the water trough for the cattle. It was time consuming and tedious. It also meant that we had to move the cows' grazing area every few days or so to a new and fresh area so that they could continue to get adequate nutrition. We did this routine for nearly a year before the time constraints of the setup finally got the better of us, and it was time to put in a fence to contain Franklin and Pauline, but allow them free passage to and from the barn so they could find shade, shelter, and water there and graze in the fields as they please.
Good job, Franklin. I know it's warm. Best. Good job.
We decided to fence off the eastern portion of our property and keep the western portion with the orchards fence free to use the winter brome as reserves by allowing those fields to grow and then having them swathed in bales for the cows' winter meals. First step in this process was figuring out where the edge of our property line was on the east side. This part turned out to be relatively simple because the previous owners had had the land surveyed, and a post was left along the edge of the southern side and the eastern side, designating where the property line lands. Once that was established, the next step was to try and draw a straight ish line across the property. We did this with spray paint, and Andrew flew his drone overhead to try and keep me in line with where I needed to go. Once we had a rough outline, I went back with pigtail fencing to map out the line where the fence should be, but we did have to adjust the pigtail post slightly until we got as close as possible to the original survey. Although the south side of the property did already have an established fence line, because we're using an electric line to keep our cows in, we needed to complete the full loop of the property in order to close the circuit properly and keep the fence electrified. Unfortunately, I had become ill during this time, and so Andrew had to pound each T post into the ground by himself while I stayed asleep in bed. He was pretty exhausted after that section of the project was complete. Next, we had to string polywire from the barn where the energizer is plugged into power to each fence post around the entire eastern portion of our property and then all the way back to the barn. Once the fence was completed and we were ready to let the cows out and test it out, we put halter ropes on both Pauline and Franklin just in case they decided to barrel through the electrical line. It would make it easier for us to catch them. However, Pauline was less than excited about crossing that threshold and was really quite nervous about it. She had to be coaxed out at first. Nothing that a good old bucket of grain couldn't handle, and pretty soon she had crossed the threshold and was following me down the lane. Once she realized she could walk through, you can slowly see her start to look around her surroundings and realize she has the entire pasture to explore. Looks peaceful with him not freaking out right now.
Right.
Pauline had been around hot wire before. She knew exactly what it was and didn't bother testing it once she saw that it was there surrounding her pasture. She was happy just to keep on eating and enjoy the new surroundings.
No. Mama's all the way down there.
Franklin, however, had never seen hot wire before, and he kind of plunged right on through the first go at it and broke the fence wire, and then proceeded to run around in the pasture where we couldn't really get a hold of him. It was a bit of an experience. Just in case he decides to bail, we can still catch him. After he realized that he's okay and his mom is still in the pasture with him, and then he's free to kind of run back and forth and wherever he wants to, he then began to test the electrical cord by touching it with his nose, which we kind of wanted him to do so that way he would know where the boundary lines were. There he goes. See if he bails through.
What if he just can't see it? I mean, it's right at eye level. Do you think he would?
He stopped. I think he sees it. I think he's just an ornery little bull.
Said no.
He sees his mama now. And then once he figured that out, he pretty much just stayed within the boundary line, pretty close to his mom. You're just gonna lick my shoe? Okay.
That's acceptable, I guess.
Franklin and Pauline are enjoying their new pasture where they can go to and from the barn just as much as they please and are able to get water whenever they want, and we don't have to haul it back and forth from the actual water hose all the time. It's been great for everyone involved.
You gotta watch them horns, buddy. Ooh, watch them horns.
Thank you for watching today on this episode of the Root Cellar Homestead.